Hello everyone, and welcome to Kaleidoscope channel. Here, what we are going to talk about with you is an 18th century world-shaking war, the 7 Years' War. This conflict was no small, localized skirmish, it swept across Europe, North America, South America, Asia, and even the three great oceans, making it arguably the first truly global war in human history. Why was this war so important? It not only completely reshaped the balance of power among the European great powers but also redrew the map of global colonies, and even sowed the seeds for the later American War of Independence. Imagine 18th century Europe as a grand international stage, with monarchs from different countries playing their parts as actors. Their ambitions, strategies, and alliances determined the course of the entire world. At the heart of the war lay the rivalry between two major dynasties, the Habsburgs of Austria and the Hohenzollerns of Prussia. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria was determined to reclaim Silesia, which had been seized by Prussia. This land was not only rich in resources, producing grain and minerals, but also held critical strategic value. Whoever controlled Silesia could wield greater influence within the Holy Roman Empire. Prussia's king, Frederick II, better known as Frederick the Great, was a military genius. He not only sought to keep hold of Silesia but also aimed to weaken Austria's position in the Holy Roman Empire. His ambitions stretched further, toward the wealthy regions of Saxony and Bohemia, where he hoped to expand Prussia's power. Saxony boasted developed agriculture and trade, while Bohemia was famous for its silver mines. Both were highly coveted prizes. Meanwhile, the rivalry between Britain and France was heating up on a global scale. Their struggle was not confined to the European continent but extended into their colonial possessions in North America, Africa, and Asia. North America offered vast lands and a lucrative fur trade. Asia was rich in spices and textiles. Africa served as the hub of the slave trade. These colonies were essential to both nations' economies. As early as 1754, Britain and France had already clashed in North America's Ohio River Valley, with small-scale skirmishes such as the Jumonville-Glen incident. These conflicts acted as a rehearsal for the 7 Years' War, serving as the spark that ignited a worldwide conflagration. In short, the roots of this war lay in monarchs' desires for territory, resources, and power, along with old grudges left unresolved by earlier conflicts. In particular, the War of the Austrian Succession ended in 1748, left behind many disputes. Austria was bitter about losing Silesia, while both France and Britain were dissatisfied with the colonial arrangements. Everyone was eager to reshuffle the deck in a new war. Before the war officially broke out, Europe's diplomatic stage saw a dramatic realignment worthy of a palace intrigue. Previously, Britain, Austria, Russia, and the Netherlands had formed a loose alliance against French expansion. But that coalition was full of cracks. Austria believed that Britain had abandoned its allies too easily in the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, allowing France to quickly regain control over certain territories. The Netherlands, weakened by economic decline and reduced military strength, no longer wished to send troops to defend Austria's Netherlands. Britain's King George II also had a unique concern. He was Elector of Hanover, and constantly worried that his ancestral land might be invaded by France. Hanover, located right on France's doorstep, could easily be swallowed up if he was careless. To protect Hanover, Britain decided it needed a stronger and more reliable partner, the rising military power of Prussia. Thus, in January 1756, Britain and Prussia secretly signed the Convention of Westminster. Under this agreement, Britain promised to provide Prussia with the enormous sum of £670,000 annually, worth several billion in today's terms, in exchange for Frederick II's pledge to defend Hanover from French threats. This money enabled Prussia to maintain a powerful army but also placed Frederick under immense diplomatic pressure. Meanwhile, Austrian Chancellor Wenzel Anton von Kaunitz orchestrated a stunning diplomatic reversal. He urged Austria to abandon its old alliance with Britain and instead turn toward its longtime enemy, France. while also maintaining good relations with Russia. In May 1756, Austria and France signed the Treaty of Versailles, officially forming an alliance that shocked all of Europe. After all, France and Austria had been bitter enemies for centuries. Their union was nothing short of a collision between fire and ice. Russia also joined this anti-Prussian alliance, seeing Prussia as its main rival in northeastern Europe. The Russians hoped to seize East Prussia in exchange for territories in Courland and Semigalia. Interestingly, the old alliance between France and Prussia broke apart partly because Frederick II offended Madame de Pompadour, the favorite of King Louis XV of France. It is said that Frederick made disrespectful remarks about her in a diplomatic setting, which greatly angered the French court and accelerated the deterioration of Franco-Prussian relations. This grand diplomatic reshuffle completely transformed Europe's alliance system. Britain and Prussia stood together, while France, Austria, and Russia formed a powerful coalition. This realignment left both Britain and Prussia in a precarious position. Prussia's army numbered about 200,000 men, well-trained and disciplined, but limited in size. Hanover's forces and its allies added another 50,000, bringing their total to roughly 250,000 troops. Their opponents, however, were far more numerous. France had around 150,000 regular soldiers. Austria fielded more than 100,000 troops, and Russia possessed a massive army of 330,000, nearly 3 times the size of Prussia's. That said, Russia's military was considered relatively weak, with outdated equipment and poor logistics. By contrast, Prussia's army was renowned for its high level of militarization and strict training. The ratio of soldiers to population was 4.5 times higher than in France, making Prussia a true military miracle of the 18th century. Frederick II knew that although his troops were elite, they were heavily outnumbered. He would have to rely on flexible strategy, rapid maneuvers, and exploiting his enemies' mistakes to survive against such powerful foes. On August 28, 1756, Frederick II struck first, leading the Prussian army in a sudden invasion of neutral Saxony. Why Saxony? Because of its favorable geography. Lying between Austria and Prussia, with fertile farmland and abundant resources, making it an ideal base of operations. More importantly, Saxony's rulers had close ties with Austria and Russia, and Frederick feared it might become an enemy stronghold. Austria quickly dispatched 33,000 troops under Field Marshal Browne to rescue Saxony. But on October 1, at the Battle of Lobositz, Frederick's 29,000 men successfully held them off, forcing the Austrians to retreat. A few weeks later, Frederick compelled the smaller Saxon army to surrender and forcibly incorporated its soldiers into his own forces. While this temporarily boosted Prussia's manpower, it created long-term problems. Many of these conscripted Saxon soldiers were disloyal and reluctant to fight for Prussia. Meanwhile, the flames of war spread rapidly in North America. Both Britain and France sought the support of Native American tribes, whose warriors were familiar with the terrain and skilled in guerrilla warfare, an important factor in colonial conflicts. Because of their long history of coexistence, the French won the support of the Shawnee, most of the Huron, and the Algonquin tribes. The British, however, often clashed with Native Americans over land disputes, which strained relations. As a result, they secured alliances mainly with the Iroquois, some smaller tribes, and a few Mohicans. Still, Britain's 13 colonies in North America had a population of more than 1 million, 7 times that of France's colonies, which allowed the British to mobilize far larger militia forces. In August 1756, French troops captured Britain's Fort Oswego, cutting off British control of northeastern New York and Lake Ontario. This victory gave France the upper hand in North America, and British colonists began to feel the mounting pressure. In India, France's ally, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Bengal, unexpectedly besieged and captured Calcutta, a key British trading and military center. This was a devastating blow for Britain. Calcutta was not only the East India Company's core base but also a crucial hub of trade on the Indian subcontinent. Its loss placed Britain in a highly vulnerable position in India. By 1757, the scale and intensity of the war escalated even further. Frederick II, leading 70,000 Prussian troops into Bohemia, at first achieved impressive victories, defeating Austrian forces at Reichenberg and near Prague, showcasing his military brilliance. But Austrian reinforcements under Leopold von Daun soon arrived. At the Battle of Kolin on June 18, 1757, Frederick's 34,000 men were crushed by Austria's superior numbers, losing half his soldiers and most of his artillery. This defeat shattered Frederick's aura of invincibility and forced him to retreat to Saxony and rethink his strategy for fighting on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, France and Russia were also advancing. Under Marshal Louis de Soubise, French forces used their numerical advantage to quickly occupy much of Hanover and Brunswick, nearly bringing George II's Electorate of Hanover under full French control. Russia's army, commanded by Stepan Apraxin, leveraged its threefold numerical superiority to capture vast portions of East Prussia, including the key port of Memel. They even defeated the Prussians at the Battle of Gross-Jägersdorf. However, due to severe logistical problems, such as shortages of food and ammunition, the Russian army was unable to maintain its hold on the occupied territory and was forced to withdraw temporarily. Sweden, under French diplomatic mediation, also joined the anti-Prussian alliance, seeking to recover Pomerania, which had been occupied by Prussia. The combined Swedish and Russian fleets even blockaded British ships from entering the Baltic Sea, cutting off Britain's maritime support. This made the situation for Prussia and Britain even more dire. Prussia found itself in an extraordinarily difficult position, as Frederick faced the enormous pressure of fighting on three fronts. The armies of France, Austria, and Russia held an overwhelming numerical advantage, while Prussia was so overstretched that in some theaters of war it had virtually no troops at all. In October, Austrian General Haddock took advantage of the situation, leading a small force in a daring raid that briefly captured Berlin for a single day. Though short-lived, the raid was a stark warning for Frederick. Even his capital was vulnerable. The psychological pressure was immense. At this desperate moment, Frederick's military genius shone brightly. On November 7, 1757, at the Battle of Rossbach, he led 22,000 men and launched a surprise flank attack that defeated the 43,000-strong Franco-Austrian army. The key to this victory was the coalition commander's failure to properly scout, leaving them blind to Prussian movements and giving Frederick the opening he needed. This triumph not only boosted Prussian morale but also showcased Frederick's tactical brilliance to all of Europe. Soon after, Frederick regrouped his elite forces and rushed to Silesia. On December 5, 1757, at the Battle of Leuthen, he faced the 80,000-strong Austrian army under Charles of Lorraine with just 33,000 men. Frederick employed his signature oblique order tactic. He feigned an attack on the enemy's northern right wing, then suddenly shifted his main force southward to crush the Austrian left. With coordinated firepower and rapid maneuvering, the Prussians decisively defeated the Austrians, forcing them to retreat from Silesia. These back-to-back victories stabilized Prussia's position and elevated Frederick's prestige to its peak in Europe. The battles of Rossbach and Leuthen became classic case studies in military history, still taught in academies today. Meanwhile, in the colonies, the struggle between Britain and France raged on. Britain raised 2 new militia regiments in North America and sent over 7 regular regiments from Europe. But due to the overly cautious strategies of the British command, France made fresh gains. In the summer of 1757, the Marquis de Montcalm led 8,000 French troops and their Native American allies to capture Fort William Henry. The British lost another key stronghold, with around 2,000 soldiers taken prisoner. This further weakened Britain's position in North America. In India, however, Britain struck back. Troops of the East India Company, composed of local sepoys and a small number of European soldiers, successfully attacked the French settlement of Chandannagar. In June, Robert Clive led a force of 4,000 men against nearly 50,000 soldiers of the Nawab of Bengal at the Battle of Plassey. The British victory was due less to numbers than to intrigue. Clive bribed several of the Nawab's key officers, causing much of the Bengali army to stand idle. This victory by corruption restored Britain's dominance in India and laid the foundation for the East India Company's later expansion. By early 1758, the war's command structure shifted. French forces came under the command of the Count of Clermont. The Russian army was placed under William Fermor, and Austrian troops were led by Leopold von Daun. Britain and Hanover's allied army, including troops from Brunswick and Hesse, was entrusted to Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick. Ferdinand proved a capable commander, recapturing Bremen and, in April, pushing French forces back west of the Rhine, temporarily easing the threat to Hanover. Meanwhile, between January and March, Russian forces captured much of East Prussia, including the fortified city of Königsberg, a strategic hub in Prussia's eastern territories. Frederick too planned a campaign into Bohemia and Moravia, besieging Olomouc in May. But when Russian forces advanced into Brandenburg, he was forced to split his army for defense, leaving detachments in Silesia and Saxony to resist Austrian attacks. At the end of June, Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick led the Allied army to defeat the 45,000-strong French force at the Battle of Krefeld, relying on skillful flanking maneuvers. This victory once again frustrated France's plan to invade Hanover. On August 14, Frederick fought a fierce battle against 42,000 Russians at Zorndorf in Brandenburg. The battle was extremely hard fought, with heavy casualties on both sides. Prussia lost about 11,000 men, while Russia lost around 16,000. Although there was no clear victor, Frederick regarded the Russian withdrawal as advantageous to himself. He then led 60,000 troops in a two-pronged offensive into Bohemia. But near the village of Hochkirch in southern Saxony, he encountered 77,000 Austrians under Leopold von Daun. Frederick, with only 33,000 men, attempted to rely on his old tactics, but against a well-prepared and vastly superior enemy. His plan failed, costing him nearly 10,000 soldiers. However, the Austrian commander did not exploit his victory. Instead, he besieged Dresden without success. This gave Prussia a breathing space and allowed Frederick to regroup his forces. By the third year of the war, Prussia's situation was growing increasingly dire. Frederick's mobilization reserves were nearly exhausted, his elite units had suffered severe losses in multiple battles, and the economy was on the brink of collapse, kept afloat only by Britain's financial subsidies. He resorted to forced conscription, even recruiting from occupied territories and enemy prisoners of war. But these new troops had poor morale and combat effectiveness, often deserting or defecting. From spring to June 1759, the Russo-Austrian coalition advanced toward Berlin. Frederick, with 49,000 men, attempted to block 60,000 enemy troops at Kunersdorf. At first, the Prussians seized key high ground, but the coalition committed fresh reserves and launched a counterattack, inflicting losses of 18,000 men and nearly all Prussian artillery. Frederick was left with virtually no troops to defend the capital. Yet, due to disagreements among coalition leaders, they failed to seize the opportunity to occupy Berlin. This became known as the First Miracle of Brandenburg. This miracle was less a Prussian victory than the enemy's mistake, which gave Frederick a narrow chance of survival. On the colonial front, Britain gradually gained the upper hand. In 1759, Britain, with 44,000 regulars and militia, broke French resistance and captured Quebec, Niagara, and Fort Ticonderoga, all core strongholds of France in North America. The French had only about one-third the manpower of the British and could not withstand their onslaught. In India, the French failed in their siege of Madras, further weakening their position on the subcontinent. Britain's naval superiority also began to show. The Royal Navy controlled the North Atlantic, cutting off French supply lines to North America. In the first half of 1760, Prussian forces maneuvered desperately in Saxony, Silesia, and western Poland to avoid pitched battles against numerically superior coalition forces, while seeking opportunities to strike isolated enemy detachments. On August 15, 1760, at the Battle of Liegnitz, 100,000 Austrians pursued Frederick's 27,000 men. Through precise tactics, Frederick crushed a 30,000-strong pursuing corps, while the rest of the Austrian army failed to provide timely support and withdrew. This victory earned Frederick the title of the Great and once again proved his military genius. In October, Russo-Austrian forces briefly occupied poorly defended Berlin, but withdrew quickly when reinforcements approached. On November 12, Frederick led 44,000 troops against von Daun's 53,000 Austrians near Torgau. Although the Austrians held favorable high ground, Frederick boldly executed flanking maneuvers from both the northern and southern woods, ultimately securing victory, though at the extremely high cost of around 17,000 casualties. Meanwhile, 1760 marked Britain's major breakthroughs in the colonies. They captured Montreal, completing the conquest of French Canada, in India. They won the Battle of Wandiwash and besieged the French capital of Pondicherry, capturing it in January the following year. These victories expanded the British colonial empire and drastically reduced France's global standing. By early 1761, Prussia's army was reduced to only about 100,000 men, including garrison troops and the wounded, while its enemies on the continent held a 4-to-1 advantage. Frederick could only rely on mobile warfare, harassing enemy supply lines and bases. The Russo-Austrian coalition occupied many fortresses in Silesia and East Pomerania, including Schweidnitz and Kolberg. The fighting in western Germany was even fiercer. Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick failed to capture Kassel. The French won at Grunberg, but were defeated by the Anglo-Prussian coalition at the Battle of Vellinghausen. From July 15 to 16, 1761, 90,000 French troops attempted to seize high ground but were stubbornly repulsed by 65,000 Anglo-Prussian Hanoverian soldiers, failing in their objective. Just as Prussia seemed on the verge of collapse, a miracle occurred. In January 1762, Empress Elizabeth of Russia died. Her successor, Peter III, an ardent admirer of Frederick, immediately announced a truce with Prussia and even returned occupied territories such as East Prussia. This event became known as the Second Miracle of Brandenburg. Although Peter III was soon overthrown in a coup, the new Empress Catherine II cancelled the alliance with Prussia. Yet she also chose not to support Russia's former allies. Thus, Russia formally withdrew from the war, giving Prussia a priceless respite. On June 24, the Anglo-Prussian coalition defeated the Franco-Saxon army at the Battle of Wilhelmsthal, frustrating French attempts to strike into Prussia. In July, Frederick repelled 75,000 Austrians at the Battle of Berkersdorf, crushing Austria's hopes of recovering Silesia. That same year, conflict escalated between Britain and Spain. In the early years of the 7 Years' War, Spain had remained neutral. But after King Charles III came to power, British privateers repeatedly attacked Spanish merchant ships, and Madrid feared unchecked British expansion. Spain thus entered into a defensive-offensive alliance with France. In January 1762, Britain formally declared war on Spain, using troops freed from the conquest of French colonies. Britain captured Havana, Cuba between April and August, and Manila, the Philippines in October. Though they failed to gain complete control over the Philippines or Spain's South American colonies. Eventually, all powers realized the costs of continuing the war were unbearable, resources and manpower were exhausted. Prussia and France signed a preliminary truce. On October 29, 1762, Frederick's brother, Prince Henry, led Prussian forces to defeat 30,000 Austrians at the Battle of Freiburg, the final major engagement of the 7 Years' War. Meanwhile, naval clashes and maritime conflict still continued, but all sides were now seeking peace. On February 10, 1763, Britain and Portugal on one side, and France and Spain on the other. Signed the Treaty of Paris. France ceded eastern Louisiana, Canada, several Caribbean islands, and most of its Indian colonies to Britain. Spain lost Florida, but was compensated with western Louisiana. 5 days later, Prussia and Austria signed the Treaty of Hubertusburg, which confirmed Prussian control of Silesia and solidified the power of the Hohenzollern dynasty. The 7 Years' War thus ended with the victory of the Anglo-Prussian alliance. Britain's colonial empire expanded dramatically, and Prussia secured its place among Europe's great powers. Yet the victory came at a steep cost. Britain's national debt had doubled because of the war. To cover the deficit, King George III imposed new taxes on the North American colonies, measures that fueled resentment and ultimately sparked the American Revolutionary War. This war was not only a military struggle but also a global contest for power. This is the Kaleidoscope channel. Likes and subscriptions are the greatest help and support for us. Thank you everyone. See you next time.